about the caterer who did the fruit salads with the special colors, and that's what she made a reputation on, was the fruit salads with the special colors. She had a fruit supplier who did the dyeing for her, so the colors matched the holiday. She left him a voicemail saying that she needed the fruit delivered by December 20th because she was doing the Disney party on the 23rd, and she needed the fruit dyed, and so he delivered 2 days early on the 18th. Oranges, grapefruits, cherries, and coconuts, and the oranges and grapefruits had been dyed green. Gave her a form that said seller disclaims any implied warranty of merchantability as to the fruit delivered hereunder. She paid the price, took the fruit into her kitchen, started cutting it up. Oh, and I left out an important fact, is that she was colorblind. And then as soon as a non-colorblind employee came in, saw the oranges and grapefruits, saw that they were not an acceptable color and wouldn't be able to be used for the party, she called her supplier back, telling him, I'm not taking this fruit, I can't use it, slammed the phone down. He left her a message again saying that he would indeed fill the order by the delivery date of December 20th. But by that time, she had already gotten replacement fruit from a different supplier. The different supplier wasn't able to dye the fruit, so she was able to do the Disney party, but not to have her colorful fruit salad, and that ended up costing her jobs in the future. So the first question is, which party will most likely prevail on the liability issue, our caterer or the seller of wholesale produce? So where do you think is the first place to start on something like this? What's the first thing you're going to say?
It's a contract.
And even, how do you know it's a contract?
The seller goes up to UCC.
Yeah, does Article 2 apply to this? So when you find yourself making a statement, go back a step mentally. What assumptions am I making here? And you probably need to get those assumptions down on paper too. So first of all, does UCC apply? Because here, actually, we have a sale of goods and we have services too, because he's dyeing the fruit. So then you say, which is predominant purpose test. The goods are predominant, the fruit is predominant, and so UCC Article 2 is going to apply. Then applying that law, is there a contract? You say, yeah, we have a contract here. It's okay that there wasn't a written agreement. Statute of frauds doesn't apply because it's less than $500, and indeed the one party's already performed. The seller's already delivered the fruit. So then after we have a contract, what happened? Do we have acceptance of the goods? Here she did accept the goods under 2606 because she used them. You can have acceptance by saying I accept, or by doing any act inconsistent with the seller's ownership. Cutting up those oranges and grapefruit, that was inconsistent with the seller's ownership, so there was acceptance there. So then the question becomes, can she get out of the contract after she's accepted the fruit? And Perfect Tender Rule 2601 says that you can reject or then revoke acceptance after acceptance if there's some kind of defect. So then you ask yourself, for it to be a defect, there has to be some term of the contract that was breached. So what was the term of the contract that was breached? He delivered the fruit. He delivered it on time. He had dyed it. So then you start thinking warranty. Warranty of merchantability, we've got a disclaimer in there. Is that effective? And yeah, it is effective because it's conspicuous. It's in the capital letters, not real small print. It's conspicuous. It purports to disclaim warranty of merchantability, and it says merchantability. Uses the magic word merchantability. So there's no warranty of merchantability. Is there an express warranty? Not really one that he has made, because the contract came from her leaving the voicemail. So the other one that we talked about is warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. And here we do have a warranty of fitness for a particular purpose because we've got these colorful holiday salads. This is not just, any old oranges and grapefruit for some kind of citrus salad. She's made her reputation on all these colorful, kind of disgusting sounding fruit salads. So we've got a particular purpose. We've got the buyer relying on the seller's skill and judgment to pick out the fruit, to pick out the dye, to apply the dye correctly, because she's colorblind. She's told him, I would not have made my business would be nowhere without you. I wouldn't have my reputation without you. So he knows that she's relying on his skill and judgment. And let's see. Yeah, so even though he didn't say, I will pick the fruit out for you, expressly, it's there because she's relying on him and he knows it, and there is a particular purpose. So we've got a defect here if the fruit is not fit for the particular purpose of the holiday fruit salad, and it's not fit here because it's the sickening greenish brown. You can't use that. People aren't going to want to eat it. So we have a defect. We don't have perfect tender. We do have acceptance. Yeah.
If that warranty were also disclaimed, would there be no breach?
No. I mean, if he says, I'm delivering these, all I purport to do is deliver oranges and grapefruits. I don't say that they're fit for any fruit, for any fruit salad. I don't say that they're merchantable, as is, you inspect and you decide. Then I don't think you would have a defect then. But the fitness for particular purpose warranty is in there even though he doesn't expressly make it. So since she's accepted it, since there is a defect, you can't reject. After you've accepted, you're into revocation of acceptance. So you ask if she has grounds for a revocation of acceptance under 2608. And then you have to run through the 2608 test. She didn't know of the defect here at the time she discovered, or at the time she accepted. And that was because the defect was hard to discover at the time of acceptance. That's one of the two things. It has to be hard to discover at the time of acceptance. And the reason it was hard to discover, first of all, she was colorblind. And second, the coloring was on the inside and not on the outside. Oranges and grapefruits have the skins, and you can't see what the inside of the fruit looks like until you cut it up. So it was hard to discover, and second, for revocation of acceptance, the defect has to substantially impair the value to the buyer. This defect, the discoloration, certainly impairs the value to the buyer. She can't use it at all. And lastly, had to notify the seller within a reasonable time. And she did that. She called him, that very afternoon or the next morning. But it was a reasonable time. Then there was a little side issue that nobody really saw last time, is that there were no defects in the coconuts and cherries because he didn't dye the coconuts and cherries. So could she revoke her acceptance as to that part? And no, it's a commercial lot, as they're going to use them all together. So she could revoke as to them even though they weren't greenish brown because she couldn't use them without the oranges and grapefruits. So you've got an effective revocation of acceptance. Then the next step, and you kind of go through the issues just really chronologically, I think is the easiest way to do it, through the stages of the contract. Then the next issue is seller's right to cure. Did he have a right to cure here? Did he take advantage of that? And 2508 is what governs that right to cure. And notice that he's still within the contract time because she told him that she wanted him to deliver it December 20th and he delivered December 18th. I think she notified him the 19th, she notified him the afternoon of the 18th, and then the next morning on the 19th he called her and said, we're going to deliver, we're going to make good, we're going to cure within the original contract time. So he has an absolute right to cure, but 2508 requires that the seller notify the buyer seasonably of his intention to cure. And you kind of have to ask yourself, since this was on such a short time frame, was this seasonable? The next morning, because she needed the fruit the very day after, and she's having to make alternate arrangements, and the party's coming. And I think that could probably go either way, whether that was a seasonable notice or not. So the last part. The last 2 points out of this 50 or out of this 35 for this part A was for a conclusion either way. I didn't care if he said it was seasonable, he was right to cure, she breached, or it wasn't seasonable, he breached. Just have a conclusion. When the question asks you who's liable, have an answer. Because you would be amazed. People just start talking, well, this is the rule, and they never come to a conclusion. So there'll be a couple points on there for a conclusion. Whatever you decide. I don't care. Just something. So that was the first part. Questions on the first part? Okay. Going on to the second part. Parts B and C were about damages. First, you assume that Julie prevails, the buyer prevails. What will her damages be? So we're into buyer's remedies. She attempted to cover by buying substitute goods. So, tell me what cover is. That's under 2712. And one of the requirements of cover is that it be commercially reasonable. You don't require absolutely identical goods, but it has to be reasonable. And so there's a question as to whether this cover was commercially reasonable because she did pay double the price. But then there's also a duty to mitigate damages, and here she was trying to avoid losing a $20,000 fee, so maybe paying an extra $160, is even required to mitigate the damages. And so you've got the reasonableness of the cover and the mitigation duties kind of working against each other. So that it would probably be commercially reasonable cover, given the fact that she's wanting to save this $20,000 fee. So then, tell me what the damages are if the cover is reasonable. And it's return to the purchase price plus the contract price the cover price minus the contract price, plus incidental damages, consequential damages, minus expenses saved. Yeah.
Could you repeat that one time?
Yeah. Buyer's damages, if they cover under 2712, are return to the purchase price, and she had already paid him $160. And then the difference between the cover price and the contract price, which here was $320 minus the $160 contract price. She didn't have any incidental damages, didn't have any expenses saved. Consequential damages, she's got some of those. She had to pay $200 in overtime for the employees, and then lost profits on the other jobs. So under that measure, she comes out to $520. Return to the buyer's purchase price is $160. Difference between cover and contract was another $160, and then $200 for the lost wages. Gets you to $520, plus whatever her lost profits are on the future jobs. And you don't have enough information to determine that. But then getting into the consequentials, you have to note that her entitlement to the consequential damages, although the buyer is entitled to consequential damages under the code, they still have to prove them. And here you have a causation problem, for that overtime, because the cover supplier, the later supplier, delivered on the same day she had asked the original supplier, the original seller, to deliver. So she might have had to be paying overtime wages anyway. So you have to note that there is a causation requirement, certainly for consequential damages, and she might not meet that. Also, these are the contract brand of consequential damages, something that the seller has to know at the time of contract and couldn't reasonably permit by cover, that kind of thing. So that might create problems for the overtime wages also, but probably not for the lost profits. So then on the other side, we've said the cover's probably commercially reasonable. What if it wasn't commercially reasonable? How would the court measure the damages then? And so you get into the measure of damages when the buyer is not covered, and that's under 2713. And then you just substituted the market price for the cover price, and the rest of the formula is the same. So it'd be return of buyer's purchase price plus the market price minus the contract price, plus incidental damages, consequential damages, minus expenses saved. Questions on the damages? How to figure the damages for the buyer? Anytime you make an assumption, assume her cover was reasonable, so I'm going to go ahead and do it now. Go back and do the other side of that, what if it wasn't commercially reasonable, and run it that way.
Yes, in reference to the first part of the question, when you're coming down and then you're trying to decide who is ultimately liable and one or the other, and you said it really doesn't matter, you can make an argument for both, but is the whole question on this is going to kind of come down to whether it was a reasonable, that the seller had an opportunity to cure, or whether it was reasonable for her to go out and find another and cover the way she did? Is that kind of the argument, the liability point?
Yeah, that's the argument, because if he had a right to cure, if he notified her seasonably and still within the contract time, and he had a right to cure, then she has to accept that cure. And her not accepting the cure is a breach of the contract, so she would be liable for seller's damages. But if and I think it really turns on the notification which turns on how reasonable it was for her to go, like, just like you said, for her to go out and get another supplier. If she acted reasonably, she didn't have to let him cure anymore because it wasn't seasonable, then she's not in breach for keeping him from curing, and his original breach from the greenish-brown fruit stands, and he'll have to be paying her damages.
So you would just want us to make the argument one way or the other when?
Yeah, and, identify the issue, and, say, it could be this because A, it could be this because B. I think A is a stronger argument. I think he's going to be in breach. Something, just when it asks you a question, just answer it, kind of thing. And you're right to argue on either side and then say what you think is the better argument. Just like he's doing research and writing for the objective memo. Other questions? Okay, let's go on to the seller's damages then. Seller didn't resell because the fruit was rotting, and you can't sell greenish brown fruit anyway. So we don't have to worry about the seller's resale damages. First, you say if the seller could have resold and didn't, then the measure of damages there is at a 2,708, and the measure is the contract price minus the market price, plus incidental damages minus expenses saved. But I wanted people to note that the seller cannot get consequential damages because that's a big thing under the code. So don't add the consequential damages in there. But then say, so that's the measure if the seller could have resold, but we don't know, maybe the seller could not have resold because the facts of the problem were that the fruit was going to be rotten in 24 hours and he didn't have any orders, so it's a pretty good bet that a court would say he reasonably could not have resold. And then if a seller cannot resell, the measure of damages comes from 2,709, the action for the contract price.
Wait, Professor, I'm sorry. 2,708 would apply if he could have resold.
Yeah.
2,709 would have measured his damages if he did resell.
Yeah, if he can't resell. And it's like if the buyer can't cover specific performance kind of thing, this is the seller's equivalent for specific performance, because you say the measure of damages, from having him resell, he can't get that because he reasonably can't resell. And so you allow him the seller's equivalent of specific performance, which is the action for the price.
And that's what happens when you don't resell, you have action for price.
It's what happens when you can't resell. If you can resell and you just don't choose to, then you measure, you use the market price instead of the resale price, because you say that that's probably what the resale price would have been. It's whatever the market price is. So you have to look at whether the seller can resell. And it's the same thing. You don't give equitable relief if damages will suffice. So you don't give specific performance if damages will suffice. But if the seller can't resell, then legal damages aren't really available to him because he can't take advantage of that. He can't resell. So, and think back to property. You presume that land is unique, so the buyer can't cover, and buy another piece of land, so you give him specific performance. That's the theoretical underpinning for specific performance, and it's the same concept operating here. That the seller doesn't have those damages available because he reasonably can't resell.
So you go back to the market price if he could resell but chooses not to?
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
he gets a recovery even
Either
if
way.
he knows he could resell but just chooses not to?
Right. Say he decides, I don't have anything for dinner tonight, I'll just use it myself, or something like that. So there's not a duty to resell, and there's not a duty on the buyer to cover, but you're going to relegate yourself to the market price as the measure of damages if you don't. Other questions? Yeah.
If he doesn't resell, then he's stuck with the market price,
They stuck with the market price.
rather than if, let's say, under 2,709, he's stuck with the market price.
No, 2,709 is when he can't resell.
Okay, you can't resell, and that's just the action for the price itself.
Right.
Whatever the price, the $160 that the contract was for.
Exactly.
And if he doesn't resell because he chooses to eat it,
Right.
then he gets market price.
Right. Say he had Publix just dying to buy oranges and grapefruit, so he could resell, but he chose not to.
But is there a chance that when he does the business with this guy, that his contract price is in fact less than the market price?
Oh, yeah.
So he's getting off better if he doesn't resell.
There is
If he
that
can.
chance. Yeah, there is that chance. But in that situation, the buyer is going to come back in and say, you could have resold. You're not entitled to an equitable remedy because damages would have sufficed. You just didn't take advantage of them. And so we measure your damages by the market price. And so your damages would be zero. Yeah. Other questions on that Article 2 question? Okay, that was it. The Article 9 question was a good bit more involved. I really wish that I hadn't given you this Article 9 question because I would use it again for this.
Feel free.
I don't even have
So I'm gonna diagram it on the board. It's probably the easiest way to do it. Yeah.
You don't have another copy of that.
I don't have one on me. I don't have one.
I don't have it.
Does anybody else have it? Was it on reserve, the Article 9 question?
Yeah, I just didn't get it.
You just didn't get it? Okay, well, I'll run through the facts while I'm putting it on the board. We've got Farmer Brown. He grows lettuce and sod and cattle in Osceola County, Florida. So the Florida non-uniformities are going to apply here. We're in Florida. He needs money. He gets a $5,000 loan from Bank One, gives his only tractor, a Model A, as collateral. Bank One approved the loan on May 1st, had him sign a security agreement, granting security interest in all tractors owned by debtor, previously owned and after acquired. That's what the security agreement says. Filed a financing statement describing the collateral as equipment. And what I did not say in here and should have is that they dispersed funds on that day too. So on May 1st, we've got Bank One files and Bank One perfects and attaches as to the Model A. And so, for that, you need to go through and say what's required for attachment. They've got the security agreement. They're given the value. He has rights in the collateral. And what's required for perfection. They filed with the Secretary of State in Florida on equipment. That is where you file. And the financing statement is, the description of the financing statement encompasses that Model A tractor because that is his equipment. So you've got attachment and perfection as to the Model A tractor on May 1st. Then on August 1st, Farmer Brown trades the Model A tractor as partial payment for a new milking machine. So what's our issue? Proceeds, right? He's trading the collateral for a milking machine, and it's barter on top of that. So because we've got proceeds, Bank One the security interest attaches to the milking machine. You say it doesn't matter that the security agreement didn't say proceeds. The general rule under 9306 is that the security interest attaches to proceeds of the collateral, even if the security agreement doesn't say so. But we've got more going on August 1st. He traded the Model A to Farm Supply Store, which is a retailer for farm equipment, toward the $10,000 purchase price. He also signed a promissory note to Farm Supply Store. Farm Supply secured the note with the security agreement, granting security interest in the milking machine, had him sign a financing statement describing it as milking machine, and filed that financing statement with the Florida Secretary of State. So, also on August 1st, FSS, Farm Supply Store, is taking a security interest in the milking machine, and even more than a security interest in the milking machine, it's a purchase money security interest in the milking machine, right? And it wasn't perfected it wasn't filed until August 10th, even though the farmer took the milking machine on August 1st, but that's okay. In Florida, PMSI lender has 15 days to file. And so this PMSI is going to prime Bank One. in the milking machine. Let's see, over on the Model A side, Bank One security interest is going to continue in the Model A in the hands of Farm Supply Store, right? Because this is not a buyer in the ordinary course of business. And under 9306 sub 3, the security interest continues in collateral after the sale, right? So now Bank One still has its security interest in the Model A. It's got a security interest in the milking machine's proceeds, but that Bank One security interest is going to be subordinate to the PMSI to the retailer FSS.
Question on the PMSI. Does not FSS have to give notice to Bank One?
It's not inventory,
Okay,
it's equipment.
thank you.
I missed it. What was FSS, one of the,
FSS is the retailer that he traded the Model A to. And Model A had him sign a security agreement, did all they had to do, filed a financing statement for this milking machine. So they have a PMSI. Even though they didn't file until August 10th, that's okay. They have the grace period.
15-day grace period.
15-day grace period in Florida.
And a PMSI will always promise security interest anyway, right? If it's filed within the
Not
records.
necessarily in inventory if you don't give the notice and all that kind of stuff. But this isn't inventory. It was the equipment in the hands of the farmer. Okay, continuing on. On September 1st, Farmer Brown needed more money because he wants to replace his Model A tractor. He's getting a new tractor. So he borrows $20,000 from Bank 2 and uses that money to buy a John Deere tractor. Bank 2 has him sign a security agreement granting a security interest in the tractor, signs a financing statement describing the collateral as John Deere tractor. He actually buys the John Deere, and Bank 2 files in the official records of Osceola County where the farm and the John Deere tractor are located. So, on September 1st, what has happened? We've got Bank 2 taking a PMSI, right, in the John Deere tractor. But what's the problem for Bank 2? They filed in the wrong place. They filed in Osceola County, and they're filing for equipment in Florida that belongs with the Secretary of State. So Bank 2's PMSI is not perfected. The Bank 1 security interest is going to attach to the John Deere tractor. Right? Because the Bank 1 security agreement said the security interest applies to all tractors presently owned and hereafter acquired. We have an after acquired property clause under 9204 that is effective as long as your security agreement says so. So the Bank 1 interest attaches to the John Deere. And it's perfected as to the John Deere because their financing statement way back here says equipment. So then, moving along. On October 1st, Farmer Brown bought a new washing machine and clothes dryer from Sears to use in his house for personal family household use. Total purchase price is $1,000. He charged it on his Sears credit card. Credit card agreement provided for a security interest in all property bought with the card. Didn't sign a separate security agreement. That's okay. We don't care. The first security agreement will be okay. Took possession on October 1st, and Sears did not file a financing statement. So Sears has a PMSI in this washer dryer. Washer dryer is consumer goods because he's using it for personal family household use. Automatic perfection of purchase money, security interest in consumer goods. Sears is okay. Yeah.
You said something about attaching to the prior security agreement?
We talked a little bit about, when you have one security agreement that says on a credit card that says, we'll have a security interest in everything you purchase on this credit card. And we said that that was okay. You don't have to file a new.
Is that the initial
Agreement.
account, initial opening of the account?
Right.
Is the first signing of the security agreement that encumbers anything you buy on the credit card?
Right, and that's what Sears had going here.
Is that with every credit card for purposes of,
No,
will you tell us?
no. Oh, yeah, if it's on there, assume that there's not a security interest unless I tell you that there's a security agreement. Especially on a credit card, because most credit cards are unsecured. Okay, going on to November 1st, Farmer Brown defaults on all of these.
Priorities.
Yeah, big time priority disputes. November 15th, 2 weeks later, Bank One says we're going to go and take everything we can. So they send the repo men out to the farm. And the repo men find no one home, so they go into his house. That should wave red flags. And they take the washing machine. They go into the barn. They take the milking machine and the John Deere tractor. Farmhand wanders by. They say, "Where's our Model A?" And he says, "Oh, we traded to Farm Supply, da-da-da-da-da." So they go to Farm Supply store. "Hey, where's the Model A?" They say, "We sold it to Brenda Byer a little bit ago." She had purchased the Model A, $3,000 cash. It didn't work for Brenda Byer. They're still able to track her down. They go out to her farm. They surround her on the tractor. They say, "Give us the Model A." Brenda fears for her life and runs. Calls the police. So we've got Brenda Byer in here too. For the Model A. And then everybody's objecting to Bank One's seizure of the property and their foreclosure sale. But before we get into that part of it, let's run Brenda Byer. She bought from Farm Supply Store, a merchant. She bought inventory from a merchant because it's in the business of selling farm equipment. She gave new value. She gave $3,000 cash. She bought in good faith. She didn't know that there was a security interest on it. So she was a buyer in the ordinary course. So we say normally that will cut off a security interest created by the seller. But Farm Supply Store didn't create the security interest. It was the remote seller, Farmer Brown, that created the security interest. So Brenda Byer's purchase in the ordinary course of business did not strip off the security interest.
Repeat that again.
Yeah.
Because the farm store was the immediate seller?
Yeah, remember the buyer in the ordinary course strips off the security interest created by the immediate seller? Brenda bought from Farm Supply Store, so she would strip off any security interest created by Farm Supply Store. The Farm Supply Store didn't create the security interest. Farmer Brown did before selling to Farm Supply Store. Continued in the hands of Farm Supply Store, continues in the hands of Brenda. Buyer in the ordinary course doesn't strip off a security interest created by a remote seller. So she's subject to that. And if you didn't pick up on this part of it, don't feel bad, because not very many people did last time. You should have gotten that she was a buyer in the ordinary course. That'll normally strip them off, but this detail, don't feel too bad if you didn't get that. Yeah.
When you say that she's subject to Farmer, is it Brown?
Farmer Brown's.
Brown's security interest, you're meaning that it's actually the bank, what Farmer Brown, when you initially bought that Model A? Okay.
Right, really Bank One
One,
security. I mean,
okay.
yeah.
I mean, I just saw it.
Yeah, you mean the one created by Farmer Brown, given to Bank One, yeah.
Professor, because Farmer Brown is the one who gave it to the farm supply place, is that why he's the remote seller? That's the
Exactly.
reason why we're breaking the chain of the security interest being stripped off by the ordinary course.
Exactly.
If it was all merchants, then we'd be fine and she would be fine.
Exactly. Here, Farm Supply Store was not a buyer in the ordinary course because Farmer Brown is not in the business of selling tractors. So it can, so the Bank One security interest continued through this sale under 93063. Buyer in the ordinary course, it was perfected, so an ordinary buyer doesn't strip it off. Certainly not a garage sale buyer. Continues here. She is a buyer in the ordinary course, but the security interest was not created by her immediate seller, so it stays on. So then, you gotta run the priorities, because Part A says, what are the relative priorities of the security interests and ownership interests in each piece of collateral, and that's really important. A bunch of folks last time just did it in the aggregate, and I have no idea what they were thinking. You have to run it, separately, because you can see that certainly the priority in the washer dryer is going to be different than the priority in the Model A. Different parties have interest in those collateral, in those pieces of collateral. So be real careful about that. Doing the Model A first. We've got Bank 1 filed, perfected back from May 1st. And we went through how it wasn't stripped out here, it wasn't stripped out by Brenda Beyer. So Bank 1 is going to have priority. It's going to have first priority.
So what you're saying is that we need to make sure that each piece of collateral is discussed and the priorities for each is
Yeah.
discussed. That's what you mean.
Yeah, when you run a priority dispute thing like this, like you see Part A, do number 1, Model A, such and such and such. Or if you want to run through and say what happened, and then in subsections, but I would do it at least in separate paragraphs for each piece of collateral, just keep it completely separate, because they're separate analyses.
What was the reasoning for Bank 1 keeping priority in the Model A?
Because it dates back to May 1st, and the sale, the trade to FSS did not strip it off because it was perfected, so ordinary buyer doesn't strip it off, and FSS wasn't a buyer in the ordinary course. Then when FSS sold it to Brenda, she was a buyer in the ordinary course, but it wasn't created by her immediate seller, so the Bank 1 security interest isn't stripped off there. So Bank 1 is the senior interest holder in the Model A, and Brenda's the only other interest holder now. She comes in second to Bank 1. Second piece of collateral, the milking machine. Who are our contestants? We've got FSS with the purchase money security interest in the milking machine, and Bank 1 security interest attached to the milking machine as proceeds of the Model A. But we said that the PMSI is going to prime the prior perfected security interest because they FSS perfected within 15 days after the debtor received the collateral. So the purchase money security interest comes in first. Bank 1 security interest comes in second. It's still perfected because the financing statement description is still accurate. Equipment is still accurate, so it's still perfected as to the proceeds. They did not have to refile within the 10 days, but they are going to be subordinate to Farm Supply Store. Everybody clear on that one? Yeah.
So when, not to get ahead, but after Bank 1, when they go out, when they want to get their, was it Model A?
Yeah. The original tractor?
Yeah. Well, now it's, okay, I'm sorry, never mind, it's gone now, because they traded it, okay.
He traded it, but their security interest continues in it. So they're okay getting the Model A. They have the right to possess the Model A. They do not have the right to possess the milking machine because FSS is prior to their interest.
So the PMSI,
PMSI primes Bank 1. Bank 1 still perfected. They didn't lose perfection just because we changed with the proceeds. They didn't lose perfection because the description in the financing statement is still accurate. The financing statement says equipment, and the milking machine is also equipment. So Bank 1 is still perfected, but it is subordinate to the PMSI. Next one, the John Deere. We've got Bank 2 with the PMSI here, but it's not perfected. We've got Bank 1 attached to the John Deere because we had an after-acquired property clause in our security agreement, and the financing statement said equipment. So this filing way back here, relates. So Bank 1's priority, it goes back all the way to May 1st in this John Deere, even though the farmer didn't buy it until September 1st. After Bank 1, we have Bank 2. PMSI would have primed if they had filed in the right place, but they didn't. And and so it's an unperfected security interest. But you should note that even that unperfected security interest is superior to the debtor's ownership rights, because there is attachment. So you talk a little bit about the difference between attachment and perfection. The unperfected security interest will not be binding, will not prime the bank one, the third party security interest, but it is good against the debtor because there was attachment, just not perfection. Lastly, washer dryer. It's just a dispute between Sears and the farmer. Bank one had absolutely no business getting a washer dryer. They didn't even have a security interest in it. So the priorities in the washer dryer is Sears with this PMSI and then the debtor and the farmer.
You just said that Sears is, they're all right, they're gonna have, or they're gonna still have the chance to repossess the washer and dryer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the only contestant on the washer dryer, except for Sears, is Farmer Brown. And Farmer Brown is for sure going to be subordinate. There was attachment. This was a hard one. Questions? Yeah, I know, understatement. But, if you get about half of it, that's probably about a B. So you're not expected to get all of it. Yeah.
Would you say that for exam purposes, the way to analyze would be paragraph by paragraph chronologically?
Write the notes, because you have so many facts, especially in this one, so many facts flying at you. Yeah, it would be really easy to forget. So I think this is a good way to do it. What happened, and then what all of this means. A separate paragraph to do the priority disputes in each piece of collateral.
Can we hit, subtitle it with dates or something?
That's fine.
I mean...
That's fine. That's fine. And what most people actually did on the exam was just to do a couple of paragraphs on the Model A, and then they would run through the facts that relate to Model A, and then they did a paragraph on the John Deere and that kind of thing. I think it's easier to organize it chronologically, but most people did it the other way, and that was fine too. Yeah.
Is it okay to abbreviate the way you did it, or is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
FSS?
Yeah, that's fine, because you're going to be very time pressured.
That's why.
And if you think it's something that I might not understand, the first time, it's not obvious
So
at
maybe the first
first.
time put in parentheses.
That's just what I was going to say.
Just follow along.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Do you do every other line and every line?
Yeah. It makes it easier for me to read every other line, but I don't require it. I mean, if you find yourself writing every line, that's okay with me.
See, this thing's more like an outline to me. I mean, when you write that out, do you care if you write it on a separate sheet of paper or if you just keep it in the rubric?
No, I think it's a good idea to outline like this on a separate sheet of paper before you get started. Because, just to have thought through the whole thing before you start. But you are going to be time pressured. So be ready for that. And I'll put little time allocations on each one. And if I were you, don't run over the time, for each question, because you'll be hating it when you come to the next one. We haven't done the second part of this one. And the second part of this one was really kind of a throwaway. It says for each piece of repossessed property, which party has the right to possession on November 20th. So then you go into, this is asking about the remedy stuff that we talked about at the beginning of the Article 9 portion of the course. You say the right to possession goes to the senior creditor after default. You have to have a default to have the secured creditor have the right to possession. Here we have defaults for all of them. There's a default on all the loans. And that right to possession to the senior creditor business is coming out of 9503. So then under 9504, if there's a default, self-held repossession is okay. Senior creditors can do that, secured creditors can do that, but they cannot breach the peace. And what that means is they can't unreasonably trespass on the debtor's property, no threats or show of force, and that duty is non-delegable. The fact that Bank One repossessed through repo men rather than sending out its own employees makes absolutely no difference. Here we do have breaches of peace. The repo men breached the peace by going inside the house to get the washer dryer. Clearly going inside somebody's house without their permission is an unreasonable trespass, is a breach of the peace. Clearly breached the peace with the Model A. surrounding Brenda Byer, making her fear for her life. That's a threat or a show of force. On the John Deere and the milk machine going into the barn, that's a much closer question. Probably breached the peace because they entered a building, but maybe not because it's not a home. So, so that you could come down either way on, but see the issue. So because they breached the peace, Bank One is going to have to return the items. Washer dryer, going to have to return to Sears, because Sears has objected and demanded possession, and they are the senior interest holder. Return the milk machine to FSS because it's the senior interest holder. Return the Model A to the buyer because she's the one that had it. But on the Model A, they do have the right to possession. They just did it the wrong way. So they can go in and replevy it from the buyer. Retake possession. Maybe just pay damages for wrongful repo. And the same thing with the John Deere. Have to return it to Bank Two now because they're the next senior interest holder with their unperfected PMSI. But then they'll be able to turn around and take it right back from Bank Two because Bank One is senior to Bank Two. They just have to do it the right way. So they return it and turn around and replevy it. So pay wrongful repo damages to maybe the farmer. So Part B wasn't nearly as big a deal as Part A.
But if you return, let's say equipment or something like a milk machine, and what I say, they wrongfully repossess it, and they have to return it, but it's been 6 or 8 months and it's been in use. Do they have to return it in the same condition it came in? You can charge them for the use?
Yeah,
from
yeah,
that?
yeah, because they acquired possession wrongfully, so, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
As of the default date, doesn't anyone who have an attachment have a right of possession?
Yes, but, and we didn't do these cases so much in this class with Alltech leasing and the Florida cases. It's the senior creditor who has suffered a default who has the right to possession. Like, think the grocery supply case where the senior creditor came in and, told the junior creditor, no, you can't take all the inventory because I want possession of it myself.
What do you mean by senior creditor?
The one with the senior security interest. Like Bank One is a senior to this unperfected PMSI. So Bank One's a senior creditor. Yeah.
And then when you were discussing about how Bank Two would have to give back the John Deere, you said Bank One?
Bank One would have to give it to Bank Two and they can replevy it. Because they do have the right to possession.
Okay.
They just can't reach the peace.
Even though the fact they even still filed in the wrong place, they have to still go through that step to replevy it. To give it back and then replevy it, it's just a standard.
Yeah, because the giving it back is because they breached the peace, not because they're not entitled to possession. They're entitled to possession, but they got it the wrong way, and you can't let them profit from their misdeeds, or else people will be running around breaching the peace all over the place. Other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, was there page 27 on that? What you were reading from?
I don't think so. Yeah, that was A and B. Did I not give you page 27?
I wasn't in there.
Oh, no. That was the most
Yeah,
important
you guys
part.
did
That was the
that?
questions.
What?
I didn't hear that.
I guess 27 fell out at some point in the...
You kept it,
the,
didn't you?
I thought
You're the
today.
one that's been
Some
taking all the
people had-
stuff out of there.
had the facts of question number 2, but not the questions of it, the last page. That what you
It's a stick.
Do you guys have it?
You don't worry about that.
I'll have it.
I didn't get it.
What's the fee?
Yeah.
Because when does it work for you?
Any other questions on that? Okay. Finish the essay questions. We're ready to start on the review of the class. I would like to take a short break and get some water. So you want to break for 5-10 minutes? No? While we're there, but if you could try to keep the questions to a minimum, because otherwise we'll never get through. We've got 11 pages single space to get through, so lots of stuff. Okay, Article 2, sales. First, pay attention to the scope of Article 2. You know, it doesn't apply to land or services or securities, leases, predominant purpose test if you have both goods and services involved. Next, how you interpret a contract under Article 2, course of performance, course of dealing, usage of trade, the standard gap fillers, you know, that we talked about, and the concept of the gap fillers. That the idea of contract under Article 2 is very broad. You don't have to have a standard written agreement. Just you have to show intent to contract and a basis for the remedy. Statute of frauds 2201. Have to have a signed writing if the price is more than $500. You know, but then there are some exceptions to that we didn't touch on a whole lot. And the signed writing over $500, you only enforce to the extent of the quantity written, you know, so it doesn't have to embody all of the terms of the agreement, but if it doesn't embody quantity, there's no basis for a remedy, and you don't have the statute of frauds satisfied. Next, we went into the parole evidence rule about when you do have a signed writing, whether you can bring in other terms. And the threshold issue for parole evidence rule is both parties have to intend it to be a final expression of the agreement, so you're not still in the negotiating stage. If you have that, you can't contradict the agreement. You can show consistent additional terms. We talked about an integration clause will keep out the consistent additional terms, but you can always explain or supplement with course of dealing, course of performance, usage of trade. And that means that you're interpreting the terms that are in the contract. You can modify it later orally, but the statute of frauds, that's not important. Going on to the warranties, express warranty, merchantability, and fitness for particular purpose for the three we talked about. Yeah.
Since we got there, can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Regarding the merger clause in terms that would have certainly been included, you said you can show consistent additional terms except the merger clause in terms that would have been included. Does that mean those two can't come in, or they can come in?
Well, another way to think about it is that if you have a merger clause, then any other terms are not consistent additional. You know, because the merger clause says everything is included. So, you know, consistent additional terms, if it's a term that would certainly have been included, you say it's not consistent additional, and if you have a merger clause, you can argue that all of them are not. All of them certainly would be included because that's what the merger clause says. So if you have a merger clause, you cannot show consistent additional terms, but you can still explain and supplement the course of dealing. Then we got into warranties. Express warranty is 2-313. And for an express warranty, you have to have a representation of fact or a promise, not puffing. We talked about sales talk. Once made, you can't disclaim an express warranty, because if you have a conflict between two terms, you interpret in favor of the express warranty. It has to be a basis of the bargain. You know, it can't be made 3 weeks after the contract was performed. And you have to have privity between the two parties, contractual privity, because it's a term of the contract. Then we had 2 implied warranties. First one was implied warranty merchantability under 2-314. And this only applies if you have a merchant seller. Implied warranty merchantability. And what that says is that it's a fair average quality, fit for ordinary purposes. So the greatest in the world, but it'll pass without objection in the trade. You can disclaim the warranty of merchantability. In other words, the warranty is going to be implied into the contract unless it's disclaimed. The way to disclaim it is through a conspicuous disclaimer using the word merchantability or as is. Those are the magic words. Fitness for particular purpose out of 2-315 was the second implied warranty we talked about. And this is when you're not talking about ordinary purposes. You have particular purposes like the 3-foot-high Jello mold for the caterer. And you have to have the buyer relying on the seller's skill and judgment. The seller has to know that, you know, that the buyer's relying on them to select the goods. And the warranty is that the goods will be fit for the particular purpose. not for the ordinary purpose. You can't have a disclaimer of that. It has to be written. And it's implied into a contract if you have a particular purpose and the buyer relying on the seller's skill and judgment unless you have a written disclaimer. But if you only have ordinary purposes, you know, if you're buying the shoes just to walk down the street, then you don't have a warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. You have to have a particular purpose. Let's see. Not going to do Magnuson Moss. We talked about disclaimers in 316. We talked about limitation of remedies.
Okay, so no,
Hands, yeah.
no full warranty or limited warranty under Magnuson Moss, nothing.
No Magnuson Moss.
If I'm gonna test it, you're just not gonna do it. That's,
Good question, counselor. It's not going to be on the test. And I'm not going to do it.
okay.
You'll be good in depositions. Limitation of remedies, 2719. You have to make clear that the remedy you're providing is the sole and exclusive remedy. If you don't say it's the sole and exclusive remedy, it will be presumed to be in addition to the remedies given by Article 2. And then, even if you have a limitation of remedy provision, they're going to run kind of an unconscionability analysis on it. Does the remedy fail of its essential purpose? Let's see, you can't exclude consequentials, but you have to exclude them. If you don't exclude them, then the buyer can get them. Not the seller, remember, the buyer. And then we talked a bit about liquidated damages. They have to be reasonable either at the time of contracting or in relation to the actual loss. It has to be hard to prove actual damages. Next we went into what happens when goods don't conform to the agreement. What we just talked about was terms of the contract, determining if you have a contract, what the terms are. Now we're moving into what happens when goods do not conform to the contract. I guess the damages was the same thing too. And we started that section with the perfect tender rule, under 2601. Remember, in common law contracts, substantial performance is good enough. Under Article 2, it's not. You have to have perfect tender, or else the buyer has the right to reject. And right to reject is under 2602. In order to reject, the buyer has to do something. They have to notify the seller within a reasonable time. In other words, if you get the goods, you don't like them, but you just, you know, put them in your foyer and don't say anything about it, if a reasonable period of time has passed, you've accepted them just by failure to reject. Seller's right to cure, 2508, absolute right to cure within the contract time. And even after the contract time, if the seller had reasonable grounds to believe the goods would be acceptable and notifies the buyer within a reasonable time. We talked about acceptance. What is acceptance under 2606? Acceptance can be just a failure to reject. If the buyer does nothing, that's acceptance. Or if the buyer uses the goods, like cuts up the oranges and the grapefruits, does some act inconsistent with the seller's ownership. Or if they say, I accept goods, that's acceptance too. And once the buyer has accepted, they're obligated to pay for the goods, but they don't lose other remedies. In other words, they still have their warranty remedies. But under 2607 sub 3, they have to notify the seller of a defect within a reasonable time after they discover the defect.
Under 2606, 1A, was the reasonable opportunity to inspect and the buyer tells the seller goods are,
Let me get to 2606 1.
I mean, because you said the acceptance occurs when you fail to make an effective
Oh, you
rejection. You do acts inconsistent with the seller's ownership or ratifies. And then the other one was a reasonable opportunity to inspect and
And just don't do anything. You
the
fail.
buyer doesn't tell seller anything.
Yeah, failure to reject within a reasonable time is an acceptance. So you have to do something to reject. And then after there's been an acceptance, the buyer can still get out of the contract by revocation of acceptance. After you accept, you can't reject, but you can revoke the acceptance. But the hurdle is higher for revocation of acceptance under 2608. You have to have a nonconformity that substantially impairs the value to the buyer. It's not just perfect tender anymore, it has to substantially impair the value. You have to notify the seller within a reasonable time after you discover the defect or should have discovered the defect. And then you have to have not known about the defect, when you accept it, if you didn't know about the defect when you accepted it, it has to be because it was hard to discover, or because the seller, assured you don't need to inspect these goods, they're okay. And if you did know about the defect when you accepted, you had to accept because the seller told you they'd fix it, and then they haven't fixed it. So usually it's going to be that you didn't know about the defect because it was hard to discover. If there's a wrongful revocation of acceptance constitutes a breach of contract. A rightful revocation of acceptance has the same consequences remedy-wise as a rejection. So you have to know that Rule 2608 pretty well if there's a right to revoke. Then we did a little bit on delivery terms, shipment contract, free on board seller's place of business, destination contract. We got into seller's remedies and buyer's remedies, and the benefit of the bargain is our goal, is our overall goal. So if you get bogged down in the formulas, that the code gives you, just think, what's it going to take to put this person in as good a situation as they would have been if the contract had been fully performed. So it's not restitution, it's not rescission, putting them in the same situation they were before the contract was entered into. It's the benefit of the bargain. You're looking ahead. Where would they have been if the contract had been fully performed? And then there are different ways to get there. Seller can never get consequentials, but the different ways are 2709 action for price for the seller. There the seller gets the contract price plus any incidental damages like the cost to go pick up the fruit from the caterer and take it back. That would be an incidental damage. And that's when the buyer has accepted the goods and the seller is unable to resell them.
Or they're lost.
Yeah. Yeah. The seller can't. Yeah, because then the seller couldn't resell it.
They are all separated by ors, correct?
Yes, thank you. I said and, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yes, I meant or. Thanks. 2706, when the seller resells, have to resell in a commercially reasonable manner. Time, place, manner, all aspects have to be commercially reasonable. Resell in good faith. Can sell at an auction or at a private sale. Either way, you can call your buddies and say, I've got these goods, what are you paying for them? And then if the seller does not resell, and the seller's not under a duty to resell, but if they don't resell, you go to 2708. And the measure there is the contract price minus the market price.
This is when he chooses not to resell.
Right, this is when he chooses not to resell. Okay, buyer's remedies. Buyer's remedies are found in 2712 through 2715. 2712 is about buyer covering. So if the seller breaches, doesn't give the buyer the goods they contracted for, the buyer can go buy substitute goods. The cover has to be commercially reasonable. Doesn't have to be identical, just commercially reasonable at the time. Good faith, reasonable time and manner. And then the buyer gets back any contract price that they already paid to the seller, plus they get the difference between the cover price and the contract price. So if they have to pay a whole lot, say they contracted for goods at $100, when they go out and sell, cover in a commercially reasonable manner, they have to pay $200 because they made a really good deal on their contract. They get the benefit of that bargain. They get the benefit of that deal. They get the difference between $200 and $100. So the damages would be $100. That gives them the benefit of that good deal they made with the seller that breached. If they don't cover, if the buyer doesn't cover and they don't have to cover, then instead of the difference between the contract price and the cover price, it's the difference between the contract price and the market price. because you think that's probably the price at which they would have covered the market price.
One more time.
Sorry?
One more time. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
say the buyer chooses not to cover, says, yeah, I don't need the widgets anyway. They would get back whatever contract price they paid, and then they would get back the difference between the market price for widgets and the contract price, plus any incidental damages, consequential damages, minus expenses saved. The buyer can get consequentials, the seller cannot. And then consequentials, we talked a bit about the difference between the tort consequentials and the contract consequentials. If you've got economic loss, like property damage, that kind of thing, that's a contract kind of concept. And so it has to be foreseeable at the time of contracting. You have a duty to mitigate, but for causation, not proximate cause. But if you've got personal injury, property damage, tort type things, that's when they have to be proximately caused by the breach. Then we did a little bit on special remedies, specific performance for the buyer, and this is just like property. The goods have to be unique. Comes up often in long-term output or requirements contracts. It's hard to, you can't measure the damages so easily. Yeah.
Professor, you told us that specific performance applies to other things such as services.
Mm-hmm.
How does that come into play regarding 2716 for our purposes?
Yeah, say you've got a contract that provides for both goods and services, but the predominant purpose is goods, you still would be under Article 2. But specific performance would not be limited to delivery of the goods. You can also make them inject the food dye or whatever the service is that they were going to do. So in other words, as long as the contract is under Article 2, the whole contract is under Article 2, and all of the obligations are fair game for specific performance. Let's see. And that's the buyer's corollary to the seller's action for contract price. I think is the easiest way to think about it, because the seller was getting money back. So in action for contract price, you're making the buyer give them the money. Perform under the contract. It's the same kind of idea. Liquidated damages we already did. Right to the goods, we talked about that a little bit. When the breacher has to be insolvent, so you're not going to be able to collect any money from the breaching party. The seller can demand cash for any future deliveries, make up what's owed on past deliveries. Remember the layaway buyer, where the seller becomes insolvent within 10 days after the first deposit. It's not going to come up because who knows exactly when the seller becomes insolvent. But what it says is that even if the seller, say, files bankruptcy within 10 days after you make a deposit on some goods, as the buyer, you can pay the rest of the purchase price and get the goods. Then we went into payment systems. There's Article 2 in what? 20 minutes? Article 2 in 20 minutes. Payment systems, there was a lot of just vocabulary to learn. Draft, drawer, drawee, yeah.
I'm sorry, can we go back up to 2718 sub 2?
Okay,
The seller's right
right
to
to the
deposit.
deposit, yeah.
Does it have to be contracted for?
Does it have to be contracted for? I don't believe so, but let me check. I think that is a gap filler, and it would have to be contracted out of.
What was this again?
Because if the
Seller's right
seller,
to the deposit under 2718-2.
Professor, if you go in as a tenant for a landlord and you leave a deposit
Mm-hmm.
to hold the apartment, and you don't, but this is only applies to goods.
Yeah, it wouldn't apply for landlords.
So if you went into Circuit City and put a down payment on something,
Mhm.
you don't have to sign a contract in order for them to keep the deposit. Do you? That's what I meant, like, does it have to be contracted?
You would have, no, this is a gap filler. So the seller is going to have the right to keep the deposit unless the contract says no. Anything else in Article 2? Nope. Payment systems? Yeah?
Just briefly, I think you mentioned that we won't have an essay on these or just multiple choice. How much of the test is multiple choice, how long should it take, and how much of those are the
Yeah, the payment systems. In the class, we spent 50% of the time on Article 9, 25% on payment systems, and 25% on Article 2. And on the test, probably about 18% of the points are payment systems, and 59 and 34. Wait, whatever it is, it's split. The 7% that I'm leaving out of payment systems is split equally between Article 2 and Article 9. So, spend your time as you see fit. But the payment systems are going to be multiple choice questions only. So. So the vocabulary, know what a draft is. It's an order. You're ordering somebody else to pay. An order that's a negotiable instrument. Drawer, drawee, who they are. An order versus a promise versus a note. A check, a draft drawn on a bank. Know what it is to issue something. It's when the maker or the drawer first hands this thing out. Know the payor bank, the payee on a check, the depository bank. Know what an instrument is. All these definitions you can find in 3103 and 3104. Know what a negotiable instrument is. Written, unconditional promise or order to pay, a fixed amount of money, payable to bearer or order, on demand or at a definite time, with no extraneous undertakings. But you can refer to collateral or waive laws for the benefit of the maker. But no extraneous undertakings like I'll mow your yard every week too, in addition to paying you $100 on the first of every month. That kind of thing. That would be an extraneous undertaking, and you would not have a negotiable instrument. Then we got into the banking system. And 4401, the bank can pay an item when it's properly payable, and it's properly payable when it's authorized by the customer. And it's authorized by the customer when the drawer's signature is not forged and you have the correct payee. And in order to have the correct payee, you've either got to have bearer paper or you've got to have your string of endorsements be valid, no forged endorsements, and have the person hold the check be the one named at the end of the string of endorsements. The payor bank has the responsibility to recognize a forged drawer signature and not pay. Did I say the payee or the payor? The payor is the one that has that responsibility. So if the payor bank pays on a forged drawer signature, they can't charge the account of the drawer. They're going to have to. They paid it with their own money. They can't go back up the chain. That duty is on the payor bank. Payor bank may pay overdrafts. Doesn't have to, but can, as long as it's properly payable. Talked a bit about stop payments. Payment orders are good for 6 months. So say a bank pays wrongfully, either over a stop payment order or a forged drawer signature, they have the wrong payee. They're going to have to recredit the customer's account. They can't go back up the line. They take the loss, the payor bank. But then they must pay an item that's properly payable. So if they have a wrongful dishonor of an item that's properly payable, they're liable for all proximately caused damages, including consequentials. So that can be pretty hefty.
That stop payment orders that should be in writing?
Yeah, in Florida it has to be in
It
writing
has to be.
and delivered to a bank officer during banking hours. And it has to be given to them, it can't be given to them like 2 seconds before the check clears. It has to be given to them within a time so they can reasonably act on it. Okay, we got into the drawee's responsibility to pay a draft. Remember, a draft is the order you're ordering somebody else to pay. And the drawee under 3408 doesn't have any obligation to pay. Just because I tell somebody to pay my friend $100, they don't have to do it until they accept. And acceptance is when the drawee generally stamps their name on the draft or signs the draft. But a drawee bank, if in the banking system, can have liability on a draft even if they don't accept it if they miss the deadline for rejecting it. And then we talked about the deadlines for rejecting. And here they are in the different situations. If you're cashing a check at the counter, so I go and cash my paycheck at First Union where the school has an account, and I don't have an account at First Union, I just say, give me the cash for this check, then it's final when paid. They can't even chase me out to the parking lot and take the money back. Once the money's in my hand, it's final. They can't revoke the settlement, they can't charge back, it's final. Then we had the on us item.
Isn't that an on-us item?
Well, it is, but when you talk about an on-us item, you usually mean something that's deposited rather than cashed over the counter.
Okay, but when it's cashed over the I have that under on-us. But
Yeah.
when it's over the counter, there's no provisional settlement, it's final, regardless of,
You got it.
as long as you're at the depository bank.
It's final when made. And then an on-us item, when you're depositing it, like say I have an account at First Union, I go deposit my paycheck into my account at First Union, and it's drawn on First Union also, an on-us item, on-us deposit. The bank, it's really the regular deadlines. They can dishonor by the midnight deadline, midnight of the banking day following the banking day it was deposited. And they do that by giving notice to the payee. They would drop a letter in the mail to me saying, hey, school didn't have any money in its account. We're charging back here. I can say that now because we know it's not true anymore. So I can say that.
What happened to you, Mr. Klein?
So they just have to send notice by that midnight deadline. And then they can charge back my account. In other words, their settlement with my account with that deposit was provisional through the midnight deadline. They have until the midnight deadline to undo it. And if I've withdrawn the money in the meantime, they can sue me for it. So they can not only charge back, they can pursue me for the amount of the item. Then there's a situation where the depository bank is not the payor. Say I take my First Union paycheck and I deposit it into my account at SunTrust. You know, there are going to be intermediary banks here. This is where we talked about the Federal Reserve and all that stuff going through the banking channels. And the same rule really is the on-us item. Each bank in the chain is going to have until its midnight deadline, midnight of the banking day, after the banking day it received it, to return the check. But if they miss the midnight deadline, they're liable for it, whether or not it's properly payable, whether or not they can charge their customer's account.
Do we have to know the two Reg CCs?
No,
No? Just the midnight deadline for the state
just the
law?
UCC stuff. Knowing when you get out and practice that Reg CC, you have to know, but we'll not do Reg
I'll
CC.
learn it again in a year.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, then we got into all these warranties on the checks. Transfer warranty, presentment warranty, endorser liability. Endorser liability is under 3.415. And what that says, when you endorse the back of the check, you say, if this check is dishonored, I will pay it. And so endorser liability obligates you to pay the check if it's dishonored. But once it's accepted by the drawee, the endorser liability is discharged. Transfer warranty, even if you don't endorse the check, if you transfer it to somebody else, you're making a warranty that all the signatures on that item are authentic and authorized. So you're warranting that the drawer's signature and all the endorser signatures, they're not forged. So you're entitled to enforce this instrument. And it runs to all later parties in the chain. That's how you get to sue back up the chain if something goes wrong. That's the transfer warranty. Presentment warranty is different. Presentment warranty runs to the payor when you present the item to the payor to be paid. You're not transferring ownership, you're saying, here it is, pay it. And the presentment warranty warrants only the authenticity of the endorsements, not of the drawer's signature. Because remember, it's the payor bank's responsibility to recognize a forged drawer signature. So then we talked about some different situations when something goes wrong, who's going to bear the loss. First one was if you have a forged drawer signature and the payor paid. The payor is going to bear the loss, they have a duty to know the drawer signature. If if you have a forged drawer signature and the payor did not pay and dishonored it, it's going to go back up the chain via the endorser liability and the transfer warranty to whoever took from the forger, you know, the last solvent party in the chain. Same thing if you have a forged endorsement. But if you have a forged endorsement, the payor bank is not responsible to, does not have a duty to accept to recognize a forged endorsement. So even if the payor bank pays, they can recover back up the chain too. Okay, but if there's a negligent party, their negligence substantially contributes to the forgery, they're going to bear the loss. So if there's a forged drawer signature that the payor bank does not recognize, ordinarily they would bear the loss, right? But if there's some party in the chain that was negligent, their negligence substantially contributed to the loss, payor bank can pin the loss on the negligent party. It doesn't have to bear it themselves. Talked a little bit about if the bank sends a statement, you're responsible for telling the bank that any mistakes on the statements, you have to notify them of any alterations or forgeries within 30 days after receiving the statement, or else you can't assert it. That's it on the banking system. Then we went into credit cards and debit cards. And you do need to know the truth in lending statutes on credit cards and debit cards. The credit cards, it's TILA 170. It's the right to withhold payment. And that lets you assert against your credit card issuer any of your contract offenses that you might have against the merchant based on Article 2. Like if you ordered through the catalog a blue dress and they sent you a red dress, you know, you could tell your credit card company, I'm not going to pay for that. But the limit on that 170 right is that it's only a right to withhold payment. You can't recover payment that you've already made. And it only applies for transactions over $50 made within the same state or a 100-mile radius. So if you take a trip to San Francisco and buy the red dress and thought it was a blue dress, it wouldn't apply. You can't withhold payment. Yeah.
Not only do you not get the right to refund, but you have to assert it before you pay the bill.
You have to, in good faith, try to resolve the problem with the merchant. That's
No,
true.
but you have to assert the problem before you pay. You can't pay the bill and then.
Oh, right. It's just to withhold
Wait later,
payment.
right.
Right. It's not to recover payment you've already made.
And you said something after that about the cardholder's right against the issuer. So it would be my dispute with Visa, and then Visa would have to then go to the merchant. So I'm relieved of liability once I tell my credit card holder, and then it's their duty to argue with the merchant.
Right. Right. And that their ability to go back against the merchant comes out of the contract between them and the merchant bank and the merchant. So that's not a statutory right like we saw with transfer warranties and presentment warranties. It's a contract right.
So it's not, I have in my notes an example, leaving Borders to work out with the customer. It's not with the customer, it's with the...
Well, the reason Borders is going to have to work it out with the customer is Visa is going to charge back Borders' account. They're going to go through that contract, right, they're going to pass it back up the chain to Borders. So the customer tells Visa, hey, I'm not paying you. You know, so they have a Citibank card, so they tell Citibank, Visa, I'm not paying you. Citibank goes to the merchant bank and says, we're charging back under our agreement. And merchant bank goes to merchant to Borders and tells them, we were charged back, we're charging you back, you get the money from the customer.
That's what it is.
That's
So there's
how-
a third step of then that merchant coming back to you.
Oh, you
So
can be
it's
sure they'll come
circling,
back to you.
it's gonna come back to you.
Yeah, they'll say, you took our $50 back, give us the dress back, or, you know, whatever, we're gonna see. But if you don't fit into the right to withhold payment, say you've already made the payment, you're not dead in the water, because there's TILA 161, which applies to billing errors. This is the erroneous charge, the amount was wrong, the goods were never delivered, that kind of thing. It's not for breach of warranty. It's not for the dress should have been blue and it was red. It's for I never got the dress. I never ordered this dress, that kind of thing. And you have to send written notice within 60 days after the statement, after you receive the statement. So it's like the bank statement. You have a duty to examine the statements. You have 60 days. You also don't have the $50 floor, 100-mile limit, same state limit. Then it's not cut off by payment. It's just a 60-day. It's not cut off by payment. It's not just right to withhold payment, but it is limited to 60 days after you get the statement. And then we talked about unauthorized use. If somebody steals your credit cards, that falls under TILA 133. And the customer is going to be liable up to $50 for charges made before they notify the credit card issuer of the loss. Then we got into debit cards. And we said that debit cards are just a different way to access funds in the checking account. There is no credit being granted. It's coming directly out of the checking account. It's just like writing a check. It's really a kind of wire transfer. But the point is that it comes out of your account immediately. And we talked a bit about if there was an unauthorized transfer, if they pull money out of your account without your authority, without your authorization, if you didn't give the user the card or your PIN number, and you didn't receive the benefit from the transaction, you can undo the transaction. But where people have problems is when they give the card to somebody and somebody uses it for a whole bunch of things they weren't supposed to. If you gave your debit card to somebody, then you're not going to be able to get out of the transfer. You're not going to be able to undo the transfer. But if you didn't give it to them, it's just pretty much like the credit card rule. You're not going to be liable, or you're only going to be liable up to $50 in general. But that limit can extend up to $500 if you don't report the card lost within 2 business days after you discover the loss. Or within 60 days after you get the statement showing all those unauthorized charges.
Professor? That can go up to 500 if after 2 days after you discover the loss?
2 business days after you learn of the loss. And we talked about how that's not a real workable rule because who knows, the bank's not going to know when the loss. Okay, then we got into deferring payment, promissory notes, that kind of stuff. We talked about promissory note. What a promissory note is, it's a promise to pay. I promise to pay X, the sum of Y dollars. And you have your terms, when you're going to pay, what the interest rate's going to be. You pay in installments, do you pay it all at one time? Prepayments, in common law, there is no right to prepay, but just about all the notes give the right to prepay now. We talked about bearer paper versus order paper. Bearer paper says pay to bearer, pay to cash, pay to blank. What it means is that whoever holds the note or the draft is entitled to payment. Order paper means that in order to be entitled to payment, you not only have to have possession, you also have to be the person named, either through the string of endorsements or the person originally named in the instrument. And it can go back and forth between bearer paper and order paper depending on whether you have an endorsement in blank or an endorsement over to a particular person. We talked about negotiability and the defenses of the obligor under 3305, holder in due course. To be a holder in due course, you have to be a holder, so you have to have possession and be the one entitled to payment on it. Instruments not apparently forged, no apparent irregularity or incompletion. You have to have taken for value and in good faith, so it's a whole lot like a bona fide purchaser in real estate. Without notice that it's been dishonored or that there's an unauthorized signature or a defense to it. And if you're a holder in due course, you're not subject to any of the contract offenses. Like say the buyer gave the seller, like Farmer Brown gave Farm Supply Store a note for $8,000 toward the milk machine. Say Farm Supply Store never delivered the milk machine. Farmer Brown would have a contract offense on that note because he never received the goods that it was given to pay for. But if Farm Supply Store had negotiated that promissory note to a holder in due course, holder in due course is not going to be subject to that contract offense.
I have two questions on Mrs. Snyder. With regard to a draft, under, the first requirement of written,
Uh-huh.
under 3103, what is the draft? What is a draft? I know what it is, a cashier's check, a teller's check, or a certified check.
Not necessarily. A draft is an order that's also a negotiable instrument. Just think of it like a regular old check is a draft drawn on a bank. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cashier's check, teller's check, all that. It's just, when you talk about draft, just think about it to differentiate it from a note. That the person doing the ordering and making the payment are the same person on the note, and on a draft they're not.
And number 2, the second requirement was unconditional.
Yeah, a
Now-
written unconditional promise.
Right. Now, I have in my notes, the note cannot reference another document or condition.
Right.
Now, it says because you transfer to someone else, it's negotiable, they're not going to want to check the other documents, and you don't want to force a transfer to do that.
Right.
Now, does that mean in that note that you can have reference to the mortgage or
No.
to the piece of property?
It would, except there's a specific exception in the statute that says that you can reference collateral and security and that kind of stuff. It's like if you say this note is given in accordance with the terms of that certain purchase and sale agreement dated March 17th, 1992, and is subject to the terms and conditions thereof.
So it can reference the collateral, but it can't reference any other document or condition.
Right. Right.
That would make it unnegotiable or not
Yeah.
negotiable.
Yeah. Which means you can still transfer the note to somebody else, but they can't be a holder in due course, because a holder in due course has to acquire by negotiation. So what that does when you make it non-negotiable is you keep the holder of the note from being able to cut off the obligor's contract offenses, because that's what holder in due course is all about.
So the requirements, if you have a negotiable instrument, that means that you're a holder in due course?
If you acquired it for good faith and value without notice of dishonor or irregularity, And if you're a holder in due course, you're not subject to those contract offenses or contract counterclaims. You're still subject to the defenses like bankruptcy, infancy, duress, that kind of thing. And they're listed in 3305, what you're subject to: lack of capacity, fraudulent inducement. But you're not subject to the contract claims. You never deliver the milking machine. And we talked just a little bit about the shelter principle, which is interesting, is that if you have particular rights, particular property rights, whoever you transfer those rights to gets them all, is presumed to get them all. And the way it comes up in this course is that if you have a holder in due course transferring to a non-holder in due course, like giving the note to a church as a donation kind of thing, the church would not be a holder in due course because they didn't acquire it for value, but they would acquire all the rights of their transferor. So they would acquire the holder in due course rights. It's probably more interesting. Well, I think it's an interesting topic, but it wasn't a big part of the class. We're to secure transactions, unless you have any payment system questions. Okay, and this should go fairly quickly because it's fresh in our minds. Yeah.
Those questions on file, those were kind of tough.
Yeah, they were.
Choice.
The payment systems questions. Yeah, they were probably a bit tougher than what you'll have. I mean, not too much tougher, but they were tougher. Yeah, the multiple choice questions are very specific. You know, you have to know who the drawer is, that kind of thing. It's not gonna be like this with a whole bunch of issues. Other questions before we start? Okay. Secure transactions. Talked about the difference between unsecured credit and secured credit. Unsecured, you don't have collateral, you don't have a connection between your debt and some of the debtor's property, and that means that you can't realize on the debtor's property until you get a judgment and you either record it in the real estate records or you give your writ of execution to the sheriff and have them go levy. We also talked about how unsecured creditors cannot get the exempt property, can't get a judgment lien on exempt property. You know, the debtor's $1,000 of personal property, the homestead, an annuity or life insurance is exempt property, but you can contract around that exemption by giving a security interest. Unsecured creditors can't get to it. We talked about the equity of redemption, which is the right to pay the debt off in full, redeem the collateral. We have that right until the foreclosure process is concluded by a foreclosure sale. Yeah.
Are we gonna need to know the foreclosure procedure in Florida?
And all that Florida statute stuff? No.
That requires judicial
Well-
foreclosure and must do a title search to find all defendants, file
No,
a
no,
complaint,
no.
get answer, file for summary judgment.
No. You need to know the priority of payments coming out of a foreclosure sale, but you don't need to know all the title search, service, and process, all that.
Are we going to be responsible for the common law right of redemption and also statutory right of redemption? Common
There's
law.
no statutory right of redemption in Florida, so you're not going to need to know that, but you will need to know common law right of redemption. Other questions? Statutory right of redemption is the right that some states give per statute to redeem the collateral from the foreclosure purchaser, like for 6 months or a year after the sale. Florida doesn't have it. Your right of redemption is cut off by the foreclosure sale in Florida. Let's see. Secured creditor has the right to possession after a default under 9503, either through self-help or replevin. You can't breach the peace. We talked about how foreclosure sales of real estate can be set aside. You know, if the price is so low it shocks the conscience, or if you have a low price plus some kind of impropriety. But it's a lot harder to set aside an Article 9 foreclosure sale. If the buyer buys in good faith at a foreclosure sale, even if the seller didn't advertise correctly or didn't do whatever, you don't set aside the sale on the personal property side like you do on the real property side. Article 9, sale and deficiency judgments. Under 9505, the secured creditor is not obligated to have a foreclosure sale. They can just retain the collateral in full satisfaction of the debt unless the debtor objects. Yeah.
We just get, do we need to know the Florida commercial property, you know, for assignments of rent and subordination and non-disturbance?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
And,
The test is pretty much UCC.
okay, and, the self-help and the replevin,
Need to know that. No, you don't need to know the replevin procedures, but know that the right to possession gives you the right to replevin. You know, you can't go through the judicial process to get possession, and that's called replevin. So you need to know what's out there. You don't need to know exactly how it's done. But the test is pretty much limited to UCC. You know, you've got to know the priority, that kind of stuff. We talked about foreclosure sale, and we did this in the Article 9 problem. You have to give the debtor notice. If it's a private sale, you have to tell them after when the sale may occur, or if it's an auction, you have to tell them, you know, auction is a public sale, you have to tell them when and where it will occur. It has to be commercially reasonable in all aspects. But if it's not commercially reasonable under the UCC, you don't set aside the sale. You just let the debtor sue the selling creditor for damages. Whoever bought at this commercially unreasonable foreclosure sale still keeps the property. The sale's not set aside.
you let the debtor sue the new buyer?
No, the debtor sues the old seller, the one who sold for too little or didn't advertise or whatever. But, because we talked about, with the judicial foreclosure sale of land, they set aside those sales all the time.
Oh,
And they
this is
don't
all
under Article
personal.
9. Yeah, and they don't under Article 9. Know what you do with the proceeds of the foreclosure sale, goes to the expenses of the sale, and then the foreclosing creditor, and then the subordinate interest.
That's priority.
That's the priority. And then to the debtor, it does not go to the unsecured creditors. And it doesn't go to a senior interest because they haven't lost anything. The sale's subject to the senior interest.
Excuse me, what did you say? Expenses go for the sale and then what?
Expenses of the sale, then to pay off the foreclosing creditor, and then to pay off the subordinate interests in the order of priority,
Surplus.
surplus to the debtor.
Two approaches to denying deficiency. Measure deficiency for the fair market value, and then deny deficiency altogether.
Right.
The creditor
If-
has burden of showing fair market value. Do you need to know
Exactly.
that?
To be honest, I forget if that's on there or not. It's fair game. It's fair game. Attachment 9203. Got to either have a security agreement that describes the collateral, and the debtor has signed, or the secured party can possess the collateral, take possession of the collateral. That's a substitute. Secured party has to give value. Debtor has to have rights in the collateral. And, yeah,
Under possession, I think the example we always use is pawn shops.
Yeah.
If they give up possession, do they give up the attachment?
yeah. So, attachment and perfection. Know the difference. If you don't have perfection, but you do have attachment, it's still good between the lender and the debtor. It's just not good against the other lenders or buyers, not against third parties.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, know the difference between attachment and perfection. That these requirements, we talked about the security agreement giving value and debtor has rights in the collateral, that's what's necessary for attachment. And even if you don't do, whatever else the law requires to put third parties on notice, you still have attachment. It's still good against the debtor.
And the lender.
It's still good for the debtor and the lender. It's not good for, bank two who comes along. You have to have perfection to make it good against third parties. But just because you don't have perfection doesn't mean you don't have attachment.
Right. But you can't have perfection without attachment.
Exactly. Be able to classify collateral, goods, consumer goods, equipment, inventory, intangibles, instruments, accounts, general intangibles. And you especially need to be able to do that because how you perfect depends on what kind of collateral it is. If you file in the county records, if you file with the Secretary of State, for instruments and money, you have to take possession to perfect. But for accounts, you can't take possession. The general intangibles, you have to file. So you have to know what the things are, if you have possession. After acquired property and future advances, know what that's about, know what a future advance is, know what after acquired property is, that the security interest can attach to after acquired property, if the security agreement says it can, and that future advances will be secured, if the security agreement says they will be. Know what proceeds are, know a security interest continues in proceeds even after the sale, unless you have, what we just talked about yesterday, buyer in the ordinary course or the ordinary buyer for an unperfected garage sale buyer. And the security interest also continues, the security interest attaches to the proceeds in the hands of the debtor. This is under 9306. Then we had that weird little assignment on default and acceleration thrown in there. If there's an acceleration clause, then once there's a default in the payment, the creditor can accelerate the balance due, say it's all due, and at that point the debtor can't just reinstate, they have to pay off the entire amount of the debt.
Yes, the default first.
Has to be a default before there can be acceleration, right?
Now, if there's with the acceleration clause, You can have an acceleration clause without a prepayment clause. And you can have, right?
Mhm.
But you wouldn't have a prepayment clause if not for the acceleration. Or you would.
I think
Either
they're
way.
separate.
Either way, you can,
Yeah, because the prepayment is the debtor's right to prepay, and acceleration is the creditor's right to force the debtor to pay everything.
unless you preclude in the contract prepayment. You can do that, can't you?
It's the opposite. In common law, there's no right to prepay. But it's really the reverse practically, because just about all the forms give the debtor the right to prepay. But sometimes they have prepayment penalties, you know, and they can do that because in common law, there's no right to prepay at all. Then we got into perfection. What's required to put third parties on notice? We've got the pledge, possession, you know, automatic perfection for purchase money interest, purchase money, security interest in consumer goods. Filing under non-UCC law, like certificate of title for a car, or filing under UCC, filing a financing statement. And then 9401 tells you where you have to file. And in Florida, for just about everything, you file with the Secretary of State. For land-related collateral like timber, you file in the county where the land is. Farm products, you file where the debtor is. Crops, you file, you have dual filing where the debtor is and where the crops are.
Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, in Florida, for land-related collateral, you file where the land is, like timber to be cut, minerals, that kind of thing, fixtures. For farm products, you file where the debtor is, the debtor's residence or principal place of business. And for crops, you have to file in two places. You file where the debtor is and where the land is, where the crops are.
That's the county where the land is and the crops are.
Right, when I'm saying where the land is, where the debtor is, I mean the county where they are. Right,
That's for land and fixtures in Florida,
yes,
is in the county,
in the county where the land is,
for land and fixtures.
yeah. Yeah, for like timber, minerals, that kind of thing, land-related collateral. It'll jump out at you that it's land-related, because it's going to really be land-related.
Tell us about the exam, and we'll go ahead and tell us.
What?
You need to know Florida, UCC,
Yes, no, the Florida 401.
Florida 401.
Florida 401. Then we talked about requirements for financing statements. Gotta have the debtor's name, gotta have the secured creditor's name, their addresses, description, collateral. You don't say what the obligation is.
Don't say the
We talked about, you know, what if there's some kind of I can't read the word, I'm getting tired. What if there's some kind of mistake on the financing statement? You know, then you look to 9402A. Is it seriously misleading? And if it is seriously misleading, then it's just like it wasn't filed at all.
I thought that intentional misleading is whether a third party could find the statement.
Right. Right. And if you say that the third party could not find the statement because it is seriously misleading, then it's not an effective filing. So you're not perfected. And know that the courts are a lot stricter on mistakes in the debtor's name than they are in the other information because it's indexed under the debtor's name. We talked a bit about perfection by possession. It's effective only during the possession. It's required for money and instruments. In other words, filing is not effective to perfect in instruments or money. And it's not effective for accounts or general intangibles. Again, PMSI and consumer goods automatically perfected under 9302. Know what a purchase money security interest is under 9107. Know that it can be held either by the seller, by the farm supply store, or by Bank 2 coming in loaning Farmer Brown the money to buy from the farm supply store. And know what consumer goods are, personal, family, household use.
Can you go over that again? Who can hold a PMSI?
Yeah, it's under 9107, and 9107 says that a PMSI can either be given by the vendor, like if they have goods worth $10,000 and they sell them for $2,000 down and an $8,000 promissory note, the vendor would have a PMSI in the amount of $8,000, assuming there was a security agreement. But it doesn't always have to be the vendor. The buyer can go to Bank 2 and say, I want to buy this milking machine for $10,000. I only have $2,000. Can you loan me another $8,000? Bank 2 says, sure. We're taking a security agreement, taking a security interest in the milking machine. But it's going to be a purchase money security interest since Farmer Brown's using the money to buy the milking machine. It's whatever, if the loan is made to enable the debtor to acquire the collateral, it's a purchase money security interest. Whether the loan's made by the lender or a third party financer. Then we talked about changed circumstances, like if the debtor's name changes. If that change renders the financing statement seriously misleading, it will not perfect in collateral acquired after the magic date. Remember, the magic date is 4 months after the change. You don't lose perfection in collateral acquired before the magic date, but you never get perfection in collateral acquired after that. And so the lenders that need to worry about that are the ones whose collateral turns over, inventory accounts, that kind of thing. If the debtor's residence changes within the state or the use of collateral changes, that doesn't affect perfection. Change of collateral proceeds, very difficult rule, 93073. Default rule is that to maintain continuous perfection in the proceeds, because remember the security interest attaches to the proceeds. To maintain the perfection in the proceeds, you normally have to refile within 10 days. And the exceptions are identifiable cash proceeds, or where the financing statement is still accurate, or even if the financing statement is not accurate anymore, if you received the proceeds in barter and you're filing in the same office.
That's the elephant rule.
That's
right?
the elephant rule. Then we went into another difficult rule for multi-state transactions under 9103. So the question for initial perfection, which state law governs, whose Secretary of State are you going to file with? For ordinary non-mobile goods, use the situs rule, wherever the collateral is, when it becomes perfected or not perfected. And then for mobile goods, of a type normally used in more than one jurisdiction. And for intangibles and accounts, use the domicile rule, and that's wherever the debtor is at that magic moment. Then we got into, after the initial perfection, how do you maintain the perfection if the debtor's moving around or the collateral's moving around? And we say it generally have 4-month grace period. If the collateral is brought into and kept in another jurisdiction, or the debtor moves into and stays in another jurisdiction, the old filing in the old state will remain effective for 4 months. And if the old secured creditor does not refile in the new jurisdiction within those 4 months, that's where you get the flip-flopping of priorities. Not technically flip-flopping, but you are deemed to have been unperfected. It's retroactive against purchasers from after the move. The retroactivity does not apply to lien creditors or to trustees in bankruptcy or to folks from before the move. Let's see. Last thing on that, we talked about goods being shipped out of the state, and both our parties understand at the time of attachment that the goods are going to go to a third state. The law of that third state will govern the initial perfection, and a filing in that destination state will be valid for 30 days, even if the goods never actually reach that state, even if they're diverted en route. And then we got into the priority disputes.
What about the mortgage stuff?
Yeah, how to get a lien on personal and real property, you need to know that. You need to know the writ of execution to the sheriff, the stuff.
Not that stuff.
Not that stuff?
Yeah,
Oh,
I guess part of that stuff, but the stuff about the first, second, and third mortgages, and if one forecloses and blah, 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 blah.
You gotta know that. You gotta know priority. Priority is important.
The interest rates, too?
Oh, no, the usury stuff, don't need to know the usury stuff, but you do need to know, if you have a foreclosure sale, who's getting what money.
Oh, we don't have to know usually?
No, no, just if you don't need to know the usury stuff, you do need to know if you have 3 mortgages on there and the second forecloses, who is the money going to. You know, be able to do the math.
Oh, you just answered the question.
Okay. We're in the home stretch, aren't you, the priority
3 more
disputes?
times.
Yep. Security interest versus lien. If the security interest perfects before the lien arises, the security interest wins. If the lien arises before the security interest perfects, the lien wins. That means you have to know how you obtain lien, right? Because you have to know when the lien arises, and you have to know how to perfect, to know when the security interest is perfected. This is the difference between the dispute between security interests, security interest versus security interest, where it's file or perfect. With the judicial lien, you have to perfect, which means you have to give the value, the debtor has to have the rights and the collateral. PMSI gets a grace period of 10, or in Florida, 15 days to perfect after the debtor receives the collateral. So if the PMSI lender files within 15 days, it will prime a judicial lien that arose before they perfected. Future advances in Florida relate back.
I just have a quick question on that PMSI. You said that Florida's 15 days, the regular rules of 10. Which one would you like us to know? 15?
15. Know the Florida rules.
And that's non-consumer, isn't it?
Huh?
For non-consumer.
Right, because they're going to be automatically perfected in consumer. Right. Let's see. Future advances, there's all the 45 days outside of Florida, but in Florida they relate back, just like the real estate rule. Then security interest versus security interest, 9 through 12. It's first to file or perfect. Future advances relate back. Even if it's not technically a future advance, it's really a new security agreement, like right here. If the new security agreement, if the description of collateral in the old financing statement fits this, like it did equipment, it relates back to the old filing. After acquired property relates back to the old filing. A PMSI, you have that grace period of 10 to 15 days. So if there's a security interest on record and you're going to sell the debtor a tractor, and the earlier security interest will attach to the tractor, you can still win out. Your PMSI can prime that old security interest as long as you file within 10 to 15 days after the debtor receives possession of the tractor. But if it's going to be inventory, there are other rules. You don't get a grace period. You have to perfect before the debtor receives the inventory. You have to give that advance written notice to the inventory lender. Yeah.
For purposes of lien creditors against secured creditors, you gave us a whole bunch of extraneous stuff before you told us not in Florida. Does that mean that the only thing regarding lien creditors against secured creditors would be that automatically relates back to the initial protection?
Yeah, well, yes. You're in Florida. The problems are going to be in Florida. But, it would be nice if you said, because we're in Florida, they relate back, but if we were in Georgia, da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, that's probably, if the essay question is worth 50 points, that little aside might be worth 1.5. It's not going to be worth 5, But there will be points allocated for it because it's something you can put down.
But
so if you're pushed and you say, "God, I just can't remember everything," that would be a good thing not to remember.
that's good enough. That's fine. I like it.
Proceeds. We talked about proceeds. The PMSI super priority continues in proceeds as long as you keep that perfection going under 9306. So if you have to refile within 10 days, if you do refile within 10 days, you still have your super priority. And then security interest versus buyer. General rule, buyer takes subject to an earlier perfected security interest. The exceptions are, first, authorized sale of the security interest. 93062. Second, buyer in the ordinary course of business, buy an inventory from a merchant, good faith, give new value, does not strip off a security interest created by a remote seller, just by the immediate seller. Garage sale buyer, 93072 sub 2. If you're a consumer buying consumer goods from another consumer, you take free of an automatically perfected purchase money security interest, but you do not take free of anything that's filed. And then an ordinary buyer takes free of even an unperfected security interest, as long as they give value and receive delivery while it's still unperfected.
I just want to ask something real quick. In regards to levy, that's when you have gone to the court properly to a judicial
We're all tired.
In regards to a levy, that's when that comes into play when the court decides on who can go with the collateral, correct?
With the, for replevin, you said?
Yeah, I was just trying to differentiate between the replevin, when we talk about replevin, and
Self-help?
self-help.
Yeah.
Just to show the differences between what processes, I think there are two different processes to go through, correct?
Self-help, you go and you take the car and you hook it up to your record and you drive away. And replevin, you go to the court and you say, Judge, we're entitled to possession of this car when you enter an order giving us the right to it. And then usually the sheriff goes out and gets it and gives it over to you.
So what we're referring to levy is when the sheriff goes out to get it, right?
Levy is not replevin. Levy is for execution.
Yeah, that's what I meant, judicial.
Yeah.
Judicial.
That's when the sheriff goes and says, I have this writ of execution and I'm taking your TV under this writ.
So what you gave us today, that's B minus. Give me a range
There are
here.
no express or implied warranties as to this information. It's, you know,
Everything you gave us is enough, we need to know for the exam.
You didn't cover it.
yeah. Now, I'm not saying that there are not difficult issues on it, but they're not going to go outside the scope of what we talked about. You know, and people got tripped up on that last time. They said, you know, all I have to know is what came out of her mouth. But, you know, parole evidence, you know, we just did parole evidence in about 10 seconds, and there's a lot to parole evidence. So if I didn't say it, then that type of issue will not go on the exam. But there could be a very difficult parole evidence question on that.
What was the general rule about security interest versus buyer, the last thing you talked about, before you did the exceptions?
The general rule under 9306 sub 2 is that, and 9, I think 201, is that the buyer takes subject to the security interest, a prior security interest.
And also a quick question with when we talked about the mortgages, if we have 3 mortgages, the first one, as soon as if that second one decides that he wants to go ahead and foreclose, then whatever, we know that the first one still has his right for the security interest.
Right.
But as soon as the second one forecloses and whatever that comes out of that will go directly to the second mortgage, correct? And then anything else, if there's anything else, it'll go down the line as far as, would it be unsecured amendment debtor or?
It would be third mortgage and then the
Oh,
debt.
that's right, third mortgage. Okay.
And unsecureds don't get anything. But even if there's nothing left over for the third mortgage is still gone.
That just, it just wipes it all out, but we still got that first mortgage.
Yeah, just
That's
think
even
every,
if,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, even if a buyer that's bought, ended up saying, bought that second mortgage.